How would it feel to invest in a property and see it in this state? Or like this? I'm Dwayne Squires, and in the last 12 months, I've serviced £6 million worth of investment property for myself and clients. And in this video, I'm going to share the big opportunity, but also big headache. How it can all go wrong, and actually how to give yourself the best chance of maximizing this opportunity. But first, this video was inspired from a viewer who asked, what's the best way for a beginner investor to get into property? And simply, it's to buy a tenanted property. You get income from day one, and in today's market, in areas where I invest in the Northeast, you can buy them at very affordable prices, which then result in generating 10% plus returns on the capital invested. Now, in theory, it's perfect, but there's a big issue on the horizon, and that's the Renters' Rights Bill. First touted by the last UK government, but later canned. The new Labour government at the time of recording are on a rampage to introduce this bill that gives tenants a lot more rights at the expense of landlords. And in theory, this is great as it raises the rental standards, but in reality, there's a very large problem on the horizon. When something goes wrong, like a huge damage and the tenant not looking after the property, or the tenant not paying their rent on time, you can no longer simply give a 2 months notice, also called Section 21. But instead, to gain possession, you'll have to go via the courts. And this is where the real issue is, because the legal system is swamped. And in some regions of the UK, there's a backlog of over 12 months. That's 12 months of potentially no rent. 12 months of dealing with repairs, which can get bigger and more expensive if the tenant does not allow you in. And there's also court and legal fees to budget for. So there's a lot of landlords who are already selling up to avoid this impending change. But here comes the opportunity. These properties are ripe for buying. A large majority of those landlords have made their money, and so just see it as an opportune time to sell and cash in. And in many cases, the same property is paying rent and generating consistent cash flow month on month, year on year. And so my clients and I invest in opportunities like this. Less than £40,000 capital needed and generating a 10.2% yield and 14.2% return. And this, just under £30,000 needed, over 12% yield and generating a return of 14.7%. And by the way, if you're really serious about growing a profitable property portfolio, I put together a free Investor Toolkit to help you get started. It's filled with checklists, analyzers, and off-market tenanted opportunities to help you get started and to build a high-performing, hands-off property portfolio. But a key problem investors have is what to look for when buying a tenanted property. So let's go to the whiteboard and reveal the key factors my team and I look out for. Okay, so the first factor to consider is rent. Rent drives what yield the property will be. So let's say it was rented for £900 a month, that would be like £10,800 for the year. And if you're buying a property for £100,000, that would be a 10.8% yield, which is very typical in the areas that we invest in for our clients and myself. Quite often, landlords get comfortable, and typically they've left the rent unchanged for years. I'll take an example of property that one of our clients just bought yesterday. It's rented at the moment for £400 per month. For the year, it's £4.8 thousand. The rent for that property, if it was a market rent, would actually be around £550 per calendar month. So nearly a 30% plus increase. That would obviously generate over £6,000 plus in rent. Now, this is why these opportunities are really, really strong, because now they're buying it for £54,000, whilst the market price for that property is actually £7,000, and the property only needs £2,000 worth of work. So literally the discrepancy between the two, or the opportunity between it, is actually getting nearly £14,000 plus in equity. Fantastic. And you might be thinking, well, Dwayne, what about the rents increasing? Well, historically for ourselves and our clients, we've got really good letting agents that strategically go into the properties. They will work the current tenants, create a strategic plan, and then get the rents to increase in due course to then get them up to market price. And you know you've got a historically really good, strong tenant who's going to be paying on time every month. And the next factor to consider is length of tenancy. When you're buying a rental property, you want the tenants to be living there as long as possible. You know, typically in our properties, tenants usually stay for 2, 3 years, up to 5, 6 years, even longer. This is why you want to be looking at, if a tenant's got a history of moving on from property to property, you're effectively going to be walking into a tenant that doesn't necessarily have that loyalty that you want to get that consistent rent. Now, going back to the previous example I mentioned where you've got a lower rent, if a tenant has been there for, let's say, a couple of years or even less, that can actually work really well for you, because that tenant might at the moment be at a low rent, but because they've been in the property for less period of time, they're less anchored to the fact that they're paying this lower rent. So it'll be easier to strategically get the rents increased. And the third thing to really factor in is now compliance. If it's a single let property, so that's just a family renting the property, the key things ready to have in place is the CP12, which is effectively gas safety, and the EICR. In some locations, there's also licensing. If you then buy a HMO, you're gonna need the CP12, the EICR, and you're also gonna need a HMO license, but there's additional things that you wanna be looking out for. For example, the risk assessment on the property. You want to be also looking at the fire doors and then interlinked smoke detectors and other assessments like Legionnaire's assessment as well. So there's a few more things to factor in when you've got an HMO. Okay, and let's go into the next factor, and that is going to be history of rent. Very easy to understand. We want a good, strong history of a tenant paying on time every month. Now, if it is being self-managed, a lot of tenants pay directly into the bank account of the landlord. So you'd want to get some bank account statement, or you'd want them to give you like a disclaimer Excel document. It will detail the dates and amounts paid, and then they would also sign off the fact that this is true and accurate information. Next factor is the deposit. By law, you can keep up to 5 weeks worth of deposit. You want to be having this because obviously there might be issues with the property when the tenant moves out. Maybe there's some painting needed, maybe there's this repair, and that tenancy deposit helps with that. Now, there's two types of ways to get a deposit. One is where you've got the deposit held externally with a deposit scheme, or one that's held internally with the letting agent or landlord, but it still needs to be registered. And the key thing is that it needs to be registered in 30 days. And if it isn't, there's actually a potential fine of 1 to 3 months of the deposit amount. So it's really key that you as a landlord register the deposit in a timely basis. A bonus factor to look out for is rental guarantee insurance. Some landlords take this insurance out because they want that peace of mind that if the tenant didn't pay, that there's something in place to make sure that they get their payments covered. Now, a key tip here is to check that the insurance is applicable. There's some rental guarantee insurance that's taken out for the type of tenant that you have in place. So if it was a working tenant rental guarantee, that's what the insurance company is expecting that to be in terms of tenant type. But if they, for example, were receiving benefits or unemployed, it could be that at the time of you making a claim that you can't actually claim because it's a different tenant profile. If in the case that you did need to make a claim, the insurance may invalidate it because it's a different tenant type. So just make sure the tenant type matches up. The next key factor to look out for is repair history. So it can be challenging to get that information, especially if it's self-managed. The landlord may not have all those records at hand. But if it's got a letting agent or property manager, they typically then have automated tools that will request light maintenance. Now, what you're doing there is looking out, is there a history of a continuous repair request coming up? That helps that by the time you come to buy the property, you could look to identify that issue, budget for it, and repair it from within the first couple of weeks or months of owning it, and really get to the root cause of it in order to stop having these frequently repair costs coming up. And coming on to the last but really, really important point is look out for the condition of property. Kind of goes back to repair, but this is really important because we've recently encountered a lot of landlords and investors who've come to us after having a really bad experience, investing in what I can only describe as Ponzi schemes, where they've been investing as further afield investors, maybe in London or abroad, and they've been buying properties in our area, the Northeast, but they've then bought them, they've been charged for loads of repairs and maintenance, only to find that they weren't being carried out. And actually there's a huge amount of repairs in addition to what was being said as being completed. The key point here is to really avoid going down that route is make sure you're working with a credible team, especially number one, if you don't live in the area, and especially number two, given the rise in regulations that are coming in place, you don't want to be caught out. So check this out. If you are serious about growing a profitable property portfolio, all hands off, and you want the help of my team and I to save you the hassle and time needed, all you have to do is go to Property Result Investments, put in a few details, and boom, you're in. Now, knowing what to look out for when buying a tenanted property is key. But where should you be investing, or better still, not investing? Watch this video to find out the 3 places we recommend not investing, especially if you're a beginner.